My kids are on another level with their love of the leaves right now.
Aww.
And it's awesome. It's also not so awesome when I walk in the house and I feel like I'm taking a walk through the forest in fall because they have brought in handfuls of dead leaves that then get crunched up. So it does bring me joy because they literally find the most joy out of the littlest thing in that it's a red leaf. Daddy, look at my red leaf. Oh. And then I have to get my rake out and clean up the living room
right?
Because of the leaves everywhere.
Those are some industrious kids if you have to bring the rake inside.
I might be using hyperbole.
They're just going for an immersive experience.
Put them to work now.
Welcome to the Sex Life Science Podcast, where we talk about everything in life from sex to science. I'm Dr. Justin Gregory Briggs, LMFT, and I have a Ph.D. in Human Development and Family Studies from Purdue University and a Master's of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy from Northwestern University. My co-hosts today are psychotherapists and marriage and family therapists George Seay, Lexie Holcomb, and Paige Blackwell. Today's episode is on the power of repetition and the roles it plays in learning and habit formation. The content of this podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. We aim to help you make informed decisions based on evidence-based practices, sound theory, and research. However, remember that the science is continually evolving and individual experiences can vary widely. In any discussions of our clinical work, we maintain strict confidentiality and ethics, using only altered or hypothetical case examples. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for medical, mental health, or relationship care, and we encourage you to consult with a qualified professional for personalized treatment. You know, we consciously and unconsciously rely on repetition of behaviors in life. And I know I talk about this a lot with my clients, and I think about this a lot every day. Really, depending on the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we repeat, we may be moving closer towards or further away from a healthy, satisfying life. As we talk about this, what kind of comes to mind? And this could be clinically, this could just be in everyday life when you think about the role repetition plays, good, bad, and neutral. What is brought up for y'all?
I talk about routine a lot with clients, and my favorite is when clients are like, oh, I don't really have any routines. Mm-hmm. You do, yes. Right? Like even in the chaos, yes. There's a routine in that chaos that they're just not mindful of. I think bringing the mindfulness into it and having clients like really think about from start to finish of your day, walk me through what you're doing. And that is so helpful, I think, in shining a light on like, no, you do have routines. Absolutely. They're just not helpful routines. How can we take the routines you already have? And how can we make them work for you?
I usually point out that everybody has a shower routine. We don't step in that shower and get lost. Like, what do I start with?
Right.
Mm-hmm. We have our little routine that we've adapted. And a lot of times that's an aha moment for clients where they go, oh, I do have a routine. A lot of those might not be helpful, but others are going to be useful. And it's about taking what is useful in that context. And in this case, a shower usually.
Right.
Then how do you develop that? How do you build on that? How do you move that into this part of your personal life?
When I think about what you said about the shower routine, it also makes sense that when you go to a new shower, how disorientating it is, where if I go to a hotel, I have to take a minute to acclimate myself on, okay, now I found my flow. But it takes a shower or two to get in that flow.
Yeah. Which then kind of leads us to establishing a routine takes repetition.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be the first time that you do something that all of a sudden it's going to click. I think about that a lot. I talk about blessing yourself with routine and repetition, not rigidity. Take in new feedback. If something's not working, don't be afraid to tweak that. I think that's one of the ways you're going to be your best, whatever that might look like, is I'm doing it this way in this year. 2 years from now, how am I doing something, for example, exercise? Or how am I doing something like check-ins with my spouse on a daily basis? Those are going to evolve as long as you bless yourself with routine, not rigidity.
Yeah.
I like the phrasing of a routine being a blessing, because I've found for myself and with clients, when you're able to embrace a routine and the repetition in it, it ends up being pretty freeing for your life, right? The amount of effort that goes into decision making and all of those small decisions that can be taken away with, hey, this is something I repeat every day, right? I found that to be freeing for the mental energy, the mental load I carry about my day.
It's a way to turn your brain off,
Right.
and help avoid burnout and decision fatigue. Think about it. If we had to consciously think about brushing our teeth, there was that movie with Will Ferrell back in the day. Anybody know that, where he counted like his brush strokes? He's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He was a real type A type person. Imagine if we didn't have repetition, and if we didn't have routines, and everything had to be such a conscious choice. That would be exhausting. And making those healthy things in life, sleep, diet, exercise, pro-relationship behaviors. We want our clients and ourselves checking in with our loved ones daily, asking those open-ended questions. Making that a repeated routine allows us to recharge. We don't have to think about doing that because it's just our ritual.
Right.
I was talking to a friend about taking trips, and I'm fresh off of this, but I was like, every time I go on a trip, I need all different outfits for every single day. And then
You and I have different packing philosophies.
Well, I'm changing it because I realized how much I was overpacking every time I went on a trip, and I have chosen my travel uniform so I will never have to think about it again.
So when George comes walking in his black jumpsuit, we know that he's traveling that day.
No, you're pretty. That's pretty close to what it is.
Flight suit.
Yeah.
He's got his windbreaker on and his jogging pants.
But I want to be as free to not have to be burdened with some of those things, or else like, fine, I can wear the same thing every day. I'm traveling. You have your specific outfits for what you're trying to do. If you're going to something that requires something like hard shoes.
Did you notice for yourself that became when you were thinking about trips, what you were going to wear as you traveled became an annoying decision?
Which is why with my ADD, I have to do it with excitement. So it has to be like right before we're packing, right before we're leaving. So it is grab everything up, and then I have too much. And then I'm only going to be there for 3 days. Why do I have 6 different options that I never use? So then I'm repacking it when I'm going somewhere. What I was like, I need something different where I'm not having to even think about it on a trip. You don't have options, George. Get that white T-shirt and those black pants.
Well, and that's an example of blessing yourself with flexibility. You had one routine and that you repeated. It sounded like the pack voraciously in the last minute, so I'm excited about it. And then you realize, and you had the wisdom to say, this isn't working for me anymore. I've been paying too many bag fees because my bag keeps being more than 50 pounds or whatever the limit is.
I was out the country, and I was in Greece. And while I was there,
World traveler.
While I was there, I did 3 hurried packings as we went from place to place. And I think the last one, I was like, this doesn't make sense, George. You keep on wanting to wear the same thing. So why do you have so many clothes? Why are they all over the place? You need to simplify this part so you don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, a thought that I had a little bit ago when Justin was talking about how routine can be so freeing and be a blessing. I totally agree. I think it's important, though, for clients to, and for myself, I know, to set the expectation. That's not always the case right at the beginning. That it takes the time and the mental effort to remain consistent with those routines. And I think that I've noticed for myself that can sometimes be the downfall for me is I want it to be freeing, and I want it to feel like, oh yeah, I do this thing every day. But the first day of that first week that I'm trying this thing and I forget, or I just don't find space for it, or I don't do the thing, I lose grace and compassion for myself. And I'm like, well, it's all gone. I can't do it. So setting that expectation, I think, for clients and for ourselves that like, hey, on the forefront, you're going to have that mental load of like having to remain consistent with this to get to that end prize of this is freeing and it's a blessing and this is easy.
Yeah.
So I thought that was important to say.
And doing that, even when you don't feel like doing it.
For sure.
That's my life's story with exercise.
Yeah.
Those people who talk about, I just love waking up in the morning and I just enjoy I've never been that person. That's just, to me, exercise is pain. It's discomfort. It's uncomfortable. Stretching is, just horribly painful. Yet it's something I do routinely. I got my 4 to 5 days a week. My wife and I have this routine. We wake up. She gets her workout in first. I take care of first breakfast with the kids, get the dog fed and do the chores in the morning. And by the time that's done and I've had a cup of coffee and maybe some food, she's up, takes care of second breakfast with the kids. I am now, George is looking at
Are y'all hobbits?
We are. Wait until 11 T's comes in. And I mean, when you got 2 kids under 7, they are constantly eating.
Hungry all the time.
Yeah. But we have this routine that allows me to sign up for pain for half hour, 60 minutes, whatever it might be. I would do that repeatedly to help slow down this aging process and to make sure that whatever the best case scenario is for me as I age and get older, I want to take care of my body. That requires me to just repeatedly sign up for pain. Just goes to show you that not everything that hurts is bad for you. And I talk about that a lot with folks. Think about that with vulnerability. And with a lot of things that are actually good for you, but might actually be uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, I think self-care has become so buzzy in the past few years, and this idea of self-care and self-love, and it's become so synonymous, I think, especially for women with bubble baths and skincare. And those things are wonderful and amazing self-care routines. Self-care doesn't always look like that. And I talk with clients about that a lot. That
it doesn't always feel good, you mean?
Yeah, it doesn't always feel good. That sometimes it's the hard thing. It's the thing you don't want to do, right? But it's still taking care of self. And we have to still engage with those practices if we are going to engage in self-care and engage in self-love.
When you think about self-care as the things you do for yourself that make you better for everybody else, that makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of times that's depriving yourself of maybe what would be selfish, which is the 2 or 3 hour bubble bath, to take that 20-minute one. That's allows you to be there to serve others.
I think sometimes it's also carving out that 20 minutes to take it when otherwise you would say, I'm being selfish by taking a bubble bath when everything's going crazy. You need some margins. And maybe that 20 minutes makes it where you don't lose it by the end of the night.
Well, and a lot of times it's uncomfortable to say no to one thing, to say yes to another.
Right. Yeah.
That comes up a lot too. If time is a zero-sum game, if I'm spending time doing A, I'm not spending time doing B. And when you think about those moments where either I have it or I know other people, my wife is notorious, but like decision anxiety, not anxiety, but just making the decision is just so hard. Like, do I go and get this dessert or that dessert? Or do I go to that restaurant or that restaurant? You are saying no to one to say yes to another. And that's not always comfortable, but we're faced with these things repeatedly.
Thinking about this piece of, okay, you have to create space in order to do some of these things. It makes me think about times and places where we have bad repetition or bad routines in our life,
Whether
they are unconscious or not, where, you get home from work and you sit on your couch for 45 minutes on your phone just because, right? Or you wake up in the morning and scroll for 30 minutes before you get out of bed. And one, those are in themselves repetition and creating routine. But two, they are taking up space for some of these other opportunities to make decisions to say, I'm going to say yes to the 20-minute bubble bath or whatever I need for self-care and say no to being on my phone. But when it is an unconscious habit, this is what I do with my morning, that becomes a whole lot harder to do.
There were two stories that came up when we started talking about this topic. And the one that I'm thinking about now is before the pandemic came, I was eating at Whole Foods a lot that semester. I was eating a kale salad bowl. I made this thing where I was eating tons of kale, and I was eating it 4 days.
That would be me signing up for discomfort.
I acquired a taste for it. I started craving
What's that like?
It is weird because the thing that would be painful before, you start to kind of acclimate to it, and you're like, I'm looking for that.
Yeah.
So I would make them so big that I would have half of it at lunch, half of it at dinner. And I unconsciously, without even thinking about it, lost 30 pounds.
Wow.
As soon as COVID came, the first thing that shut down were those salad bars. And I stopped with the repetitious habit and behavior of eating kale almost every single day.
Yeah.
And I found part of those 30 pounds very quickly. And it was interesting. One of the things that I keep on thinking about is sometimes you can fall into some good repetitious behaviors. I think that decreases the threshold of what it takes to start it. So you're saying, hey, there's going to be pain at the beginning, but sometimes you can strike while the fire is hot and it's not pain, and then you've just found yourself into a good habit.
Yeah.
But when the environmental factors change, it can also support very easily shifting back into old repetitious behaviors.
I think you're bringing up a great point about how environment influences our lives, and we repeatedly come across things in our environment that are going to make it harder or easier for us to make a wise and good choice. Knowing what those triggers or temptations are going to be is helpful as we're trying to consistently live a healthy, good, fulfilling life. Because if I am an addict in recovery and I'm not looking out for my triggers, I'm more likely to put myself around the people, places, and things that tempt me to use. That is where, we don't have direct control over our environment, but we can make it more or less likely that we're going to face one of our triggers or temptations. And so when we repeatedly make wise choices and repeatedly use our wisdom to put ourselves in situations that are more likely to help us win, like going to Whole Foods and getting the kale salad, that's part of what it takes to really live life to its fullest.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting, a story that came up for me when I was thinking about this topic. When I was an intern, I interned at Tennessee Prison Outreach Ministry, and I worked with their halfway house with guys coming out of prison. And a lot of these guys had been in prison for 15 plus years.
Talk about routine.
Right? Major routines. And they come to this halfway house, and yes, there are expectations of them, but it's not on the same level. The routines aren't the same.
All of a sudden, they have some free time.
They have free time, and they're not required to just eat what's given to them, right? They can make their own foods, and they can go out and use whatever stipends they have for whatever they want. Every time, without fail, anytime I saw one of those clients there, after a few weeks of them being there, I was always met with, Paige, I've gained so much weight.
Wow.
Paige, I'm not sleeping well. And it's because the routines were all messed up, and they had to start building routine, which is interesting because when you're thrown in prison, right, like you have routines that are set for you.
Yes.
And so you develop them just because you have to.
Yeah.
And so when they got out and are having to learn to develop these routines on their own, it was so difficult for them. And they noticed very quickly, like, here's where things aren't meshing well for me. They're not matching up. And I thought about when, Lexie, you were talking about how some of these routines that we have are subconscious routines, right? Scrolling on our phone. That reminds me so much of kind of the same situation that these guys found themselves in, right? Of like, I went to prison. My routines were set for me. I didn't think about it. It just became habit.
Like waking up at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Having to be like, oh, I need to be back in my room by 10 o'clock.
Right.
I had a client who was in for 30 years. And one of the things he told me when we were working together was, I have not been out of a room at 10 a.m. for so long that it's weird. He said, my body automatically at a certain time, I'm at my apartment, I'm at someone's house, will automatically say, oh, time to get up to go in, because that routine was baked in so much where he's having to consciously say, no, I don't have to go back to my room, and I can continue to sit in the TV room or the living room and watch TV because someone's not going to make me, go to count.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that scene in Shawshank at the end where Morgan Freeman gets out on parole, and I think he's working at the grocery store.
Yep.
And he keeps asking his manager, bathroom break, boss? And manager calls Morgan Freeman over and says, you don't have to ask, just go. And Morgan Freeman, in his wonderful voice, the narration says something to the effect of, I knew that, but without permission, I couldn't squeeze a drop. And just talking about how he had been in prison for so long, his character in that film, and you always had to ask permission. And just that repetition had trained his body to say, you need to use the restroom, you need to ask permission first. Otherwise, I'm not going to do that for you. As we become conscious of our repeated behaviors, that's where we can then start to assess them and say, which behaviors that I'm repeating are serving me? Which ones are really maybe constraining me, keeping me back? I know when I'm looking at my own life or I'm working with my clients, it's something that I want to be aware of. Look at my day, look at my week, look at my month, look at my year. We're all a part of the same private practice, and we're looking at how we're growing, or where are the months where there are the dips, and are there things we could do to improve our skill set or improve marketing or whatever it might be. Or in my personal life, I'm working out this way right now. Well, now my body's changed a little bit. How do I need to adapt that? But so many of these repeated behaviors are unconscious. And I just wonder, when you guys think about those becoming conscious, what comes to mind?
One thing that I was thinking about in regard is probably the continuation of it being unconscious. The book Atomic Habits, one of the things I took from it was, we're not who we think we are, we're what we do over and over and over and over again. Being able to leverage the consciousness of, okay, I'm overtly not who I said I wanted to be, I am what I'm actually doing. So I'm in a stretch of life where I said, if I had this amount of time, I would do this thing. I consciously know that right now I am in that space and I'm not doing that thing. So because of that, it is, well, who am I, George? Because you said that if you had this space, you would do it. You're not doing it. You're very much aware that it's going to take you consciously putting effort to do the things that you're not naturally doing. Why aren't you doing it?
I have a lot of friends who work in the music industry. The difference between writing music when you're inspired and being a professional songwriter, I think lots of people can write a song when they feel inspired. I'm not saying it's going to be a good one, but I'm not counting on when I write necessarily to be a hit. But what these people do, what these really successful songwriters do, is they just do the work of songwriting, which means in part writing when you're not inspired. You get together with the co-writers or whoever, you sit down with your instrument and you just take up that task. And that is the work of a songwriter, is you repeatedly do that regardless of how inspired you are. I remember being in college, and I'm sure I was guilty of this at times myself. You hear people say, like, I love writing. I'm such a writer. Or like, I want to be a writer. And then when you really realize how often are you actually writing?
Mm-hmm.
How often are you working at that?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take repeated efforts of, writing is the act of writing and rewriting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I love Hemingway. Oh, love him. And I have some books that have like first drafts of things or second or third drafts. And you just see how, The Hills Like White Elephants starts out like, there are these hills and they were white. Maybe not that bad, but but it takes like by the fourth or fifth rendition to all of a sudden it's this beautiful phrase. I remember when in the 90s when the Beatles came out with their anthology, which was like a lot of their tracks that didn't make the records, early versions of the song, and you see like, oh, this is something they had to work on over and over again before it became what it became.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michael, there's a story about Michael Jordan where he would shoot thousands of free throws like every day. And part of what made him so clutch were the thousands of free throws that he was spending time doing. Kobe took that and then just went cuckoo bananas with it, where he was doing that with so much stuff. As a matter of fact, Kobe, part of what his behavior and his identity became, I'm going to be the last one to leave the gym every single time. So you've had people who said, you know what, I'm going to try to outlast Kobe. I'm going to do my turn to be the last one. And he kept on playing, and he looked over, Kobe was still playing, kept on playing, looked over, Kobe still practicing. And eventually he was like, I'm done, I got to go.
Yeah.
And that's when he found out that Kobe was like, well, I was only still here because you were still here.
Exactly.
Because I will not let you be.
I will not let you outwork me.
Absolutely.
And building that as just a repeated way of living.
Yeah.
When you have that skill set. Now, I could have practiced just as hard as Kobe, and my body just couldn't do the things that Kobe's body could do. Whatever your ceiling is, you're probably going to get there in no small part because you have repeated those good habits over and over and over again.
Right.
This episode of the Sex Life Science podcast is sponsored by the Sex Test by Sex Life Science. The Sex Test is an anonymous, low-cost, fun, thorough, and entertaining tool designed to give people detailed information about their sexual likes and dislikes, their sexual values, and their expectations for their partner. When partners share their results with one another, they are shown a list of each of their sexual preferences. In other words, they have a bedroom cheat sheet they can use to try to enhance their sex life together. To learn more about the Sex Test, visit www.sexlifescience.com. Let's talk about failures and setbacks and how repetition plays a role in helping us know how to interpret those moments. So when we try to make changes in our lives, we should remember to be kind to ourselves when we're not perfect. I know I have to talk about that a lot to myself, to clients. I talk about progress, not perfection. 12-step is great at talking about progress, not perfection. Repeatedly giving yourself permission to be imperfect helps us avoid things like discouragement and can help us turn what could be a failure, if it just gets us to stop trying to do the healthy and good thing, becomes a setback. It's the difference between a full-blown relapse in addiction and, you know what, I took that first sip and maybe I lost my total sobriety stretch, but I didn't continue to drink. I just wonder what that looks like for you and your work in your life when you are thinking about trying to build these healthy routines through repetition, and you have that moment where maybe you slip, or your clients have that moment where they slip. What does that look like for you? What are some of the ways you think about those moments?
I work with a lot of clients with ADHD, and we talk through this concept often. I think that it's easy to get into that mindset that oh, I'm going to set this routine and I have to do it from start to finish every day. And if I don't, then like, what's it all for? And we talk about first the idea that they did not build up the habits that they're already in overnight.
Yeah.
It's a lifetime's worth of habit making. And so they're not going to undo it in a week just off of a new routine that they came up with. Yeah. And so talking through first that and then moving into, okay, how do we manage when you do slip up, right? How do you manage on day 3 where you sleep past your alarm that you've set for yourself? I think that it's easy. The temptation is to, well, this whole day is a wash.
Or this is not going to work.
Or this isn't going to work. Right. Yeah. This routine doesn't work for me. This whole day is a wash. I got to throw it all away. I don't think it has to be that way. Right. Like if I sleep through my alarm, okay, that sucks. It's not what the plan was. But it doesn't mean that when I do finally wake up that I can't continue the routine as I had planned it before. And then if I get to the middle of the day and I've missed something else, it doesn't mean that the rest of the day has to just go to the trash, right? Like I get to keep performing parts of the routine, that it doesn't have to look perfect for it to still be working.
I was thinking about the grace that you're talking about. I think is really necessary. I try to think about it in relation to the entire life of the individual, myself, the habit. If I have a failure, that means, okay, that's the end of it. If everything else becomes a setback once we recover from the failure, and then if the life of this, whatever it is, if we start to look at that, well, initially would have been a failure because I'm just done, switched it to a setback, then you realize that that's just a part of the process. You were never going to even be able to get to the end, to the final destination without taking the failure / setback. Once you've converted, then it becomes, oh yeah, this is just the map. This is the road.
Part of the process.
It was gonna have to happen. And the difference, I think, is you can find purpose in a setback. You can find purpose in a failure, and that might be, okay, it's time to stop. But everything else becomes a setback if you can find purpose in why you're going that way.
There was a great film I watched called The Dawn Wall. Have you guys seen this? It's a story of Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen, 2 rock climbers who climbed what's called the Dawn Wall on the face of El Capitan in Yosemite. And it's called that because when the sun rises, that's the first face that is struck by the sun. This is one of the most difficult, it's probably the most difficult climb that anybody has ever accomplished.
It's like a straight up climb, right?
El Capitan, I think it's multiple times taller than the Empire State Building. It's like 2 or 3 Empire State Buildings sitting on top of each other. Just think about that.
Yeah.
What these guys did is they picked the hardest route. They climbed it in stages because it takes multiple days to climb this. And then they just literally camp on the side of this face, hundreds or thousands of feet up. Part of the process of climbing this, because it's such a difficult climb, is that they are climbing a pitch, which is the length of rope, and then they're going to slip and fall, but they're tied in, and they get back to where they started, and they go again, and they don't go from where they picked up halfway. They go at the start of that pitch again, so they could say that they climbed, the full length of this. And in order to finish that climb, you're signing up for setback. Because there's no way. These are world-class climbers. Tommy Caldwell's been around for decades, one of the best climbers to ever live. Kevin Jorgensen, he was a boulder climber and then just got into this. And these are just elite athletes. They didn't fail because they didn't let the setbacks be a period at the end of the sentence of that story. It was more of a comma, and they just kept going. I love looking at stories like that of, I didn't get the outcome that I wanted. What can I learn from that? And then how can I make this not be a failure and move forward? Really good film, by the way. Dawn Wall, check it out.
Yeah. I think, too, a thought that comes up for me is there's so much to learn, kind of going with what George said, there's so much to learn from the setbacks that we experience. I've had it with a lot of clients where we've set a routine for them. They come in the following week. They're like, multiple times during that week, I didn't do this part of the routine. And I think what we can sometimes learn from that is, okay, maybe that part of the routine doesn't work.
Right.
So then we go back to the drawing board, right? And so I think that being able to have setbacks is so important to the process, right? That if we're not having setbacks, if things come easy.
Part of how you figure out what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? What works for one person sitting in a room and saying, okay, ideally, here's what my routine is going to look like, isn't necessarily what's going to work. And so, yeah, I think the setbacks are so important to that process of figuring out long-term what does work for me.
There's no discovery without repetition and setbacks, and not letting setbacks become failure. What you're going to discover about yourself or your relationship or science even is something that we're going to learn through this repetitive process of maybe not getting the exact result that we want.
Yeah.
Thinking about that for my own life or clients' lives, there is this process of discovery where you try something over and over again, and then you decide either this isn't for me, or I've learned here's this one specific thing that is for me. Now I can craft my routine or my repetitive behavior around this. And it's really meaningful for me. It really works for me, right? Whether that's a workout routine, the type of people you date, right? Like we learn that by trying things out and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Realizing that other people might have a little different look, a little different routine. Maybe some people like rowing for their cardio. Other people like the run. Other people like the elliptical. They probably all have their pros and cons, but it doesn't have to look the exact same way for you. An analogy I use with clients a lot is a healthy life is like a fingerprint in that they're each unique, but you know a fingerprint when you're looking at one. And so there are real common themes that tend to show themselves when we're talking about living a healthy and fulfilling life and just knowing what to put on repeat in your life. When you think about that, really get critical about, okay, so what are the things I'm repeating that are not getting me where I want to be? What are those things that I keep hearing about? And I've been repeatedly hearing about it for a long time. My brother he's an early tech adopter. Our routine is he finds this new program or app or piece of technology, and he tells me, oh, you got to try this new thing. It's the Widget Wonder 5000. And this thing is going, this Widget Wonder.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's amazing. Have you tried the Widget Wonder? The Widget Wonder 5000. Justin, you've got to try this thing. And I'll go like, ugh, I've got the 2000, the Widget Wonder 2000. I just don't know that I need that. Or I already have this other thing that is really good that I don't know that I need that. Or I like the process, Ryan. And
Are you a hipster?
Yeah.
I shoot on film.
Yeah, exactly, right? And
I do.
It usually takes me way too long to adopt the Widget Wonder 5000. And then once I do, I mean, 9 times out of 10, I'm calling him up going, dude, that is amazing. I'm saving so much time and my output is so much better. Thank you for spending 6, 8, 12 weeks telling me to try the Widget Wonder 5000 because now I have the t-shirt and the hat and I'm a huge fan of the Widget Wonder.
At what point does the act that you all keep, that cycle that you all keep on doing, at what point do you short circuit when he offers you something that's new and you say, okay, we've done it, the process so many times. If you send this to me, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be an early adopter with you.
I'll let you know when I get there. Right now I'm working on shortening the timeline it takes me to try.
Even that is a discovery of repetition, right? Here's a repeated process I have in my life, and I'm discovering every time at the end, I could have done this a lot sooner. And I mean, I'm sure we all have examples of that where we think, man, I've done that over and over and over again now, and I haven't learned the thing I need to learn yet. Yeah. Which is a beautiful part of repetition, is that we get to discover things like what works for me and what doesn't, or things like, oh, I've been blind to this for a really long time, and my life could have been a whole lot easier or more meaningful or simpler if I had seen this earlier on or been willing to see this earlier on.
So I think that also, it changes your vision where you will be able to pick it up. But it comes once you've been doing it over and over and over enough where you said, oh, I knew it. I feel it this time. That's why with a lot of my clients, I give them homework assignments and I say, you will fail at this. So you'll know, you'll carry the pain of saying you were going to do it and you not do it. And you're frustrated with yourself. You're coming in and you said, George, I tried it once. It didn't work. I was like, yeah, it didn't work. Let's try it again. And eventually you'll become the master of failing at it so many times that you will eventually succeed at whatever you're trying to do. There's an anime that is out right now.
George is revealing his pop culture.
Oh, yeah. It was funny. I said I was not going to bring anime into this, and somehow it came in.
Hey, no, nothing wrong with that. I'm surprised I haven't brought up comic books yet because I'm a big comic guy. So you bring it in. Bring it in.
So there's a story. I'm going to totally mess it up, but it's a story about, the name of the anime is called Ragnarok, where it's basically these deities are fighting these human, of
course,
legends.
Yes.
So like Jack the Ripper's on there.
You didn't need to say that.
Okay.
We all knew that there were some deities fighting legends in this anime. We saw that coming.
Well, one of the battles was between the world's greatest loser. And you're like, well, how is that? And this guy said, I fight someone, I lose, and then he would run simulations in his head until he could beat them. But he was the greatest swordsman that ever existed. But everybody could look at him and say, but we beat him.
What do we take from that?
Well, the truth of the matter is that it's what you want to take. Because if he wanted to be the greatest, he didn't tie being the greatest into the outcome of winning. He tied the greatness to his internal belief that he was the greatest. And then the people who were around him, when they saw him in this battle, they said, this guy is the greatest.
Because of what he learned through all those failures. That's the story of science right there. Science is just full of these wonderful thinkers, your Curies and your Bells.
Edisons, I thought.
And your Edison.
The light bulbs.
Yeah, the light bulbs. Like how many versions of the light bulb? Thousands
Right.
of versions of the light bulb before the one that finally worked and didn't burn out in a half a second or a couple minutes. What's failure and what's a setback? And it sounds like this anime, was he a deity or a human legend?
He was a human legend.
He was a human legend.
Yeah.
So he gets beaten, but then he learns from his defeats. So much so that he becomes the greatest swordsman in all of anime history.
But see, and I'm trying not to give
No,
the
that's
outcome.
how it works, I think. Yeah.
But that is,
Does that work?
I think that's how it works.
Sorry, I tried to go there. I tried to do my trailer narrator in a world. Yeah. Those are stories we want to hear. I love redemption stories. That's part of the reason why I'm a therapist. And so many of our clients and so many of our heroes and heroines are people who didn't win right away and had to repeatedly face that monster or repeatedly face that mountain and learn from that and adapt and shift and grow. Through that process, you become stronger, more intelligent, more kind, more loving. You eventually get to a place that you're probably a lot happier and healthier because you repeatedly work through those setbacks and you repeatedly humbled yourself and said, what can I learn here?
One of the things I think about in the discovery part is that continuing to repeat a behavior or to do something helps me with the deciding, where before, I'm not quite sure, or I'm trying to figure it out. And the more I've exposed myself to something, the more it kind of solidifies this is what makes sense. The first time I had the kale salad, I had not decided that I was going to eat that much. It was the repetition that eventually said, oh, George, you have decided that you have a taste for kale. Now, the decision that I make to proceed with it, to go for it, to look for it is not unconscious. I have decided that is a part of it through the discovery of doing it over and over and over again.
How often do you repeat yourself in therapy? I find myself
all the time.
I find myself repeating myself a lot. Just like I use the word myself twice in the same sentence. That's great.
Yeah.
Constantly. I think about this client I worked with years ago, and I want to say that we were on session 42. I repeated something. I actually don't even remember what it was now. Maybe something about self-care, things we do for ourselves that make us better for everybody else.
Bless yourself with something. Yeah. I know that's what it was.
Bless yourself with self-care. I do say bless yourself a lot. Bless yourself with flexibility. Bless yourself with self-care. I say this to her, and she looks at me and she goes, "What? How come you've never said that to me before?" And I wanted to jump out of my skin because all I could think about is I said, I have said this hundreds
so many
of
times.
times.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, you couldn't have said that. And it was all of the sudden, 375 times in, this aha moment. It's a reminder. I'm the same way. How many times, Lexie, you're going to have a little one. Paige and I have little ones. You say mama and dada 9,000, 10,000, 15,000 times before they finally really start to say it. That's how we learn.
Yeah.
You guys have your experiences repeating yourself in therapy?
Yeah, I find myself, if there is a mode of therapy that I am trying to learn more, I'll do my reading and things on the outside, but I find myself trying to repeat in the sessions I have that week or the next 2 weeks or even the next month, things that I'm learning outside and trying to bring those modes of therapy in because it helps me learn, right? It helps me like really get that mode of therapy down to better help my clients.
And the best at whatever they're doing, whether it's a surgeon or a therapist, or we mentioned Kobe and Jordan, they're going to practice that over and over. What are some of the things you're saying to clients that you find yourself repeating? Do you have any phrases that come up?
This week it's been pain is the process. Do you want me to explain it to you? I could just kind of just be like, pain is the process.
And just mic drop it.
Don't lean away from pain. And then I have some sort of variation of that. And I found that I've tried to say the same things over and over and over different ways.
Yeah.
Because I need novelty. But it does not change the principle of what I'm trying to say. So I feel like I have some Georgisms, but a lot of time it's come to therapy saying, I know I need to talk about internal locus of control, trying to find as many metaphors, analogies I can to still push this one concept. So it makes sense why that client got to your 347th iteration of it, or you saying it that many times, and then they're like, I've had clients who I've had tons of sessions with. And I will start with these things, and I'll start with locus of control. I always start with locus of control. And we get to like a good pace of therapy, and you know what I have to bring up again? Locus of control.
Yeah. Sure.
The truth of the matter is
where you're finding your worth, where you're finding the placement of where you're finding your worth and your motivation.
Thank you for because maybe the people don't know.
Yeah.
And you want to have an internal one, which means you're focusing on things that you can control versus an external one when you're focusing on things that you can't control. So how many different ways can you wrap that up? A lot. Trust me, I am trying to find all the ways. It is very easy to realize that understanding for some of our clients and for ourselves is like a key, and it will not lock in until you find the right key to the right lock where you can say, oh, oh, that's the aha moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that, George, with this piece of part of why we repeat ourselves so much. You know, I love how you said this week it's been blank, right? Part of that is because we get in a groove of practicing and spotting ideas. And part of that is because people struggle with the same things, right? So we repeat ourselves in therapy because I could go session after session and be saying the same things. You know, Justin, you asked, what's something I repeat to clients? And I feel like I'm constantly talking about just because you had that thought doesn't mean it's true. Just because you had that thought doesn't mean you need to do something about it.
Not all feelings
are facts, right? Or need to be acted upon, right?
The meaning of them.
The meaning of them.
Feelings are facts?
It is.
Yeah, I'm sure I repeated that from somebody else. I'm a regurgitator. I have very few novel
Well, I think we all are, but I was thinking about this. If you're in education, you're kind of reviewing the same type of content. So then there's things that I think about. I was like, that's a Morganism.
Yeah.
That's a Briggsism.
Yeah.
So that the other people around you can see your patterns sometimes way quicker than we can.
Which I think is part of a beautiful thing in therapy, right? A client comes in and I can maybe help them spot a pattern of repetition in their life before they can help.
Absolutely.
Before they can spot it themselves, right? And that comes from them coming in week after week and maybe saying the exact same thing. And I can go, oh, you do know you've said this 3 weeks in a row and I've said this back, right? When are we going to do something different?
Yeah.
And it takes that aha moment, George.
You're telling
like
yourself
you said.
the same story.
Right. You're making the same meaning out of this.
Over again.
You're doing this with your partner, with your sister, with your colleague. You're doing the same process or the same pattern. So we might move from talking about it with your partner to your sister to your colleague, but we're repeating ourselves in the room, both in what you bring to the room and what I as the therapist bring to the room, because the pattern of the process is the same.
Today's episode of the Sex Life Science Podcast is brought to you by the Briggs Institute, Incorporated. The Institute is an individual, couple, and family therapy private practice in Nashville, Tennessee. For more information, visit the Institute's website at www.thebriggsinstitute.com. How would you describe what today's episode was about? When we tell people about this episode, what are you going to say?
Listen to it on repeat.
Oh, not bad.
That was quick.
Yeah. Or how about tell others on repeat to listen to it? What are you going to say?
I think this episode has been such a clear indicator, one, of how important repetition is, but not just for like the good that repetition can bring, right? But also like, hey, here's the neutral of repetition and here's the bad of repetition, as well as the good. And I think that once we understand repetition in all of its forms and how it affects us in different contexts, I think that's when we can start to really build routines that are beneficial for us.
Yeah. Repetition's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Routines are unavoidable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you authoring routines and repeating things that are serving you or not serving you? Most of us are a mix of both.
Yeah.
And I think life is hopefully increasing the repetition of healthy behaviors while decreasing those that aren't healthy.
I like how in this episode today we've used a lot of examples of, you know, the rock climbers or Kobe and some things that are extraordinary feats that humans have accomplished, right? And then also thinking about so much of repetition is in really normal daily behavior. Right? I think about this book called The Liturgy of the Ordinary. Liturgy in and of itself is incredibly repetitive.
Yes.
But this book goes through different parts of your day of like making your bed, eating breakfast, walking to your car, and how all of these can have this liturgical, repetitive power to them where you get to bring almost, right? You get to decide essentially, like, to what degree do I allow the repeated behaviors of my life, even the ordinary ones, to be really meaningful in a positive or negative way. I think that, if I'm reflecting on this episode, that to me is what stands out is I have the power to decide, do I make the daily habits of my life meaningful and powerful and in the end helpful and healthy for me?
Part of what stood out for me is how we leverage this thing that's that is a part of us that is, as you just said, inevitable. How do we leverage it towards what we need to accomplish, what we need to get done? Things are going to happen anyway. So you might as well have some sort of control over it. And I think a great way to do that is to process these things with a therapist.
Yeah. Oh, look at that plug.
Amazing.
Look at that plug.
And there's tons of great therapists here at the Briggs
Are you
Institute.
taking new clients, George?
I absolutely am.
Yeah. You know what you've heard me say many times, if you're a great therapist, you always need new clients because your clients get better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's be in the habit of needing new clients. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Episode 1 in the books.
Thank you.
Nice.